I'm back. I've recently finished the third book in the trilogy I've been writing that will be out in 2023, 4 and 5. The first book of which is called The Book That Wouldn't Burn, and the whole thing's set in a massive library. And writers love to procrastinate, probably more so when they've finished something and are struggling with what to take up next. It's not that I'm stuck for ideas, I've just got lots of ideas, and it's a question of sifting through those and seeing if I can find one that I want to commit to, that I would be happy writing about for a year or 2 years or 3 years, in some form or other. So I'm back to do another one of these page one critiques, and I have shared the first video around on my Patreon and other such places and got some notes. And one of the notes was that I should elevate all of you and thereby avoid what the person kindly called a forced double chin, at the risk of exposing my baldness more completely. So I'm going to elevate you all on a stack of my fattest books. These are trade paperbacks, and I think they will lift you up nicely. Bear with me while I try to avoid a comical accident. There we go. Yes, so I got a selection of notes, and position was merely one of them. There was also the issue of enthusiasm, which I'm afraid you're just not going to get from me, because I'm not a very enthusiastic person, not demonstrably. Clearly I have enthusiasms that give me the staying power to write book series, but I'm not bubbly, and I can't fake or generate enthusiasm, which has always been a problem when the various publishers have come to me and said, could you make a little video for this book chain or these people and enthuse about your latest book? And the answer is, I will sit in front of a video camera and say some words, but no, I can't enthuse about my latest book. And another one was, I had mentioned watching back the video and realizing quite how often I said the word and they said, well, you can take that out in the editing. I'm not going to edit. I am in many ways lazy, and if I fuck this up, I'm just going to plow on and leave the mistakes in there. And if I say a lot, then I will be a person who says a lot. So pressing on, we're going to look at another page one, and this is one that I've just put on my blog today, and it was volunteered by Shauna Lawless, having seen the first video. So she clearly wasn't frightened by that and wanted to get a dose of the same sort of stuff. The lady in question is going to be published very soon. This is her debut, and the book's coming out in a couple of weeks, on September the 1st, and I have read it and reviewed it on Goodreads, and it's very good. So we can assume that the first page is going to be decent. It might be brilliant, we'll find out. You can write a brilliant book and have a fairly moderate or mediocre first page. You can write a brilliant first page and the rest of the book can be a terrible letdown. So it's by no means guaranteed that I will think it's a great first page. That of course doesn't mean that it isn't. We're going to scroll past a whole bunch of the same disclaimers that just tell everyone to take a chill pill. This is just opinion aimed at helping someone who has invited the process. So as usual, I'm going to read the first page without any comment apart from maybe the odd pause here and there just to say something. And I'm probably not going to do a very good job of it. The more smoothly it flows off my tongue, the better it's written, I imagine, because you should always try and write sentences that someone can read aloud, especially if you're hoping to have an audiobook. And immediately on the first word, I have to admit that when I read this book, there's lots of Irish names in it. I just made up my own pronunciation for them all. And Irish spellings can be very at odds with how a Brit would pronounce the word. I think it's the name Siobhan looks a bit like Siboan or some such on the page. There's only one word or only one name on this first page. And I did look it up because there is a glossary of names at the front with pronunciations, and I believe it's pronounced Amlaf. So Amlaf's armor, sword, and axe gleamed as if new. His beard, washed and bathed in lavender-scented oils, glistened in the soft candlelight and curled elegantly over his chest. I leaned forward and rubbed my finger over his lips, down his cheek, until I touched the wolf fur cloak with which covered the stone slab he lay upon. Only a stray lock of hair that had fallen across his forehead marred the effect. The nuns had dressed him well, but it was my duty as his wife to ensure he crossed over to the afterlife looking like a king. I pushed the curl back, sweeping it into line with the others. Once satisfied, I smiled. Lying down, eyes closed, had always been the way I preferred Amlaf, but this was better. Death had a finality that sleep could only imitate. Death suited him in other ways too. His right hand had stiffened to grip the sword tighter than I had ever seen him hold it in life. He had been a warrior once, true enough, but by the time my father inflicted this marriage upon me, Amlaf had been almost 70, his fighting days over. When his armies left Dublin to fight the Irish, he had gone with them, but I knew when battle was at its worst, he sat on his fat horse while our warriors drew their swords. Well deserved, the warriors said, for Amlaf's reputation preceded him. The number of men he'd slain in his prime numbered over 1,000. No one dared call him coward, only old. Sinking into the chair next to Amlaf's body, I waited for the abbot to arrive. The monks had taken on an age to dig the grave, rain and storms hindering them from their work. Last night, finally, they had finished. I almost pitied them, though pity was wasted on the clergy. They'd chosen a life where misery was a virtue. If they felt closer to God by freezing to death on this hateful piece of rock, who was I to tell them otherwise? Not even the gold crosses that Amlaf had gifted the monks, which now adorned the altar, could give this miserable hovel any glamour. And somehow, the morning sunshine seeping in through the windows made the stone walls look more tomb-like than when lit by candlelight alone. And that's the page one. So it's worth noting here that this page avoids doing several things that I repeatedly advise throughout the critiques on the first 10 or so pages I do. And since this is actually, in my opinion, a very good page one, it just speaks to the fact that the qualifications I give my advice, saying don't take this too seriously, it's not the only way, it should be taken, the qualification should be taken seriously, not the advice, because here's an example of going in a different direction and still doing a fine job. And the two things that it has avoided, which I often advise, generally advise, are to include dialogue, it doesn't, and to include some form of action, tension, a problem to be solved, and it doesn't do that either. These things are generally advisable, and it's nice to have them on page one, and I think you really need to have them in chapter one, and here the author keeps us waiting until page 3 for dialogue, which isn't like some terrible crime as long as the first 2 pages are entertaining. Fair enough. And when we do get to it, it's a full-fledged conversation. In my review on Goodreads, I say that this is an understated book. It's in some ways a gentle book, and there's a very significant power in understatement, but understatement is difficult to use. But when used correctly, yes, it can make a very powerful statement. And I believe that's what Lawless has done in this book. She has written an understated book that uses understatement to great effect, and it's a good read, excellent read. So let's move on to the page and see why it works. So line 1 is just a statement of fact. It's showing us some things. I'm pretty neutral on it. It's not saying it was raining. It's not some sort of stuff about the weather. So it does have more than that. It's the presence of arms and armor. Could be promising some excitement, but it's just a short line. But by line 2, we get this sort of slight contradiction. Something off kilter is happening. We started talking about axes and swords, and suddenly we're into lavender scented oils and washed beards. So that contradiction, that slight mismatch between the two lines, is creating a question which is good. It makes you wonder what's going on and pulls you on. And then we move on, and now we have suddenly been subverted again in a gentle way. But we started off looking at Amlav and thinking maybe that this was going to be a third-person story told by Amlav or about Amlav. But no, it's actually a first-person story, and the point of view character is now coming into the scene, and she is touching Amlav in what seems to be a fairly intrusive manner. So again, that's a question, why is this woman messing with his lips? What's going on? And it's good. It's not like, what's going on? I don't understand. I'm completely lost. It's generating another small question that pulls the reader on through this power of confounding expectations to some extent. And we move on and we discover that Amlav is dead. So that's explained the earlier strangeness. We discover the POV as a woman, his wife, and although Lawless hasn't spent any time describing the setting, she has generated a setting for us, which is good writing. She has, by talking about this dead body on a stone slab, a king dressed by nuns, we automatically have expectations, and in our heads we are creating a suitable environment without needing to have talk of a chapel or its windows or arches and things that maybe a less confident writer would do. Lawrence has had faith enough in her ability to induce those things in us that she doesn't actually need to say them. I will probably start talking about images created in the reader's head, because most readers create images in their head. As a side note, I don't. I have aphantasia. I don't like to say it's something I have. It's not a disease, but I don't create mental imagery. So when I use it, it's just a figure of speech. But still, that chapel is in some way being created in my imagination in a parallel way to the way that the images would be drawn in somebody else's. And now we move on, and here's another line that sort of subverts or confounds expectation. Once satisfied, I smiled. So we don't expect a wife by her dead husband to be smiling. So the fact she is happy about this situation, again, creates interest, generates questions, pulls us through. And she goes on to say she's basically to reiterate that she's happy about this, but it's telling us about the relationship, and it's doing so in a skilled, writerly way. There are no statements about, just bald statements saying what the situation was, or we had an unhappy marriage, I didn't like him very much, etc., which you could do, and that would be a type of info dumping. It would just be a heavy-handed way of delivering any information. But instead, she's used nice prose. Death had a finality that sleep could only imitate, and in amongst those lines, we learn about the nature of their relationship. We continue on, and she's talking about him having been a warrior, and just the way that this is delivered does a lot of work with very few lines. The word inflicted in conjunction with the marriage speaks volumes. We don't need paragraphs to reiterate the point and hammer it home. There's enough. She's told us these things in her own way. We feel grounded. We feel we have a growing appreciation of the situation. It seems clear she's much younger than her husband. And then we go on to learn about, his battles and such. And there's world building here in fairly short order. The fact that he's leaving Dublin to fight the Irish raises either questions if you don't know the history of the place, or it answers them and tells you, if you do, that he must be a Viking. But it's certainly an interesting line that he's in Dublin and he's ruling it, he's the king, and he's going out to fight the Irish. I've highlighted the double use of the word number there. That's something that editors look for and writers too. It's just a feature, if you like, when you're writing. Words get stuck in your head and you tend to use them too many times in a row, and then when you read it back it's a bit awkward, and you tend to try and remove those repetitions and restructure to avoid them. This one has stuck. And as we are being told this stuff about Amlav's fighting past, we're also learning about the POV. We're learning that her hatred of him seems to extend beyond maybe what's might be entirely understandable, but it extends beyond just the ordinary. That this guy has killed allegedly 1,000 men in hand-to-hand combat, and now the fact that he's old and sitting out the battle, it's sort of implied in the way that this is told that he's actually a coward. Just saying nobody will call him a coward, as if he should be called a coward, that doesn't seem particularly reasonable in this context. And then we finish off with some more discussion of the process for his burial. And she is she's describing this all through the character and setting the scene through the character, which whenever you're doing any form of description, it's always much better to do it through the eyes of somebody with an opinion about the thing, or who develops an opinion about the thing. And this, because in writing you always want to do as many things as possible at the same time. You don't want to confuse people, but you want to deliver the story and the feelings in as concentrated a form as possible. And so one way to do that is, when you are describing something, do it for a person, and then as well as describing the thing, you are illuminating the person who is seeing the thing by their commentary on it, by what they choose, what they notice about it, what about it is important to them. That's illuminating both ways, and you are getting more bang for your buck there. And you should always, I feel, try to do that sort of thing. And she's done it here. She is showing us that this woman is maybe a spiky personality with strong opinions, and she's not afraid to criticize, and she's angry. And all those things are good. They make it potentially a much more interesting character, the one, not a vanilla goody-goody who's just going to be passive, but someone who looks like they're going to get out of their chair and mix things up and cause trouble maybe, all of which is much more exciting in a read. So I am hyped for the next page and the following chapters. And we are left with some sorts of questions now, because what's her situation going to be? The king's dead. Well, that's a big upheaval in this society. What's the role of the king's wife, the queen, when the king dies? In some societies, maybe she's thrown onto the funeral pyre. Is she going to be ejected from the castle and pushed off to a nunnery? We don't know. And it's interesting it's the question that has been posed. And I guess the tension that I talked about earlier has now potentially been indirectly introduced here, where her situation may be unsure, and we'll read on to find out. So I conclude that it's a strong page that pulls you through the from the top to the bottom by relentlessly pushing the boundaries of our understanding outwards, just incrementally, and all the while it's keeping you on your toes by confounding your expectations. It's not in a sort of complete spinning everything around on a 360, but you think you're heading in one direction, and then gently you're redirected, and gently you're redirected, and that's good. It keeps your interest up. There's a power in that, and it makes me think of that line from the first line of The Red Sister, which is often quoted, where it says it's important when killing a nun to ensure that you bring an army of sufficient size. And here that does the same sort of thing in the space of one line, that you've got the nun is the focus of the word killing, and that's a surprise. You start off, it's important when killing, so we're talking about something, killing something, and there's something important we need to remember. We don't expect the thing to be a nun, and then it does it again in the very next part of the line, where the thing that you're supposed to be remembering, and you might think, okay, it's a nun, so the thing we're supposed to be remembering is like make sure nobody sees you do it, or bring a sharp knife. But no, it's bring an army of sufficient size. So again, it's confounding your expectations. It's twice in one line. People liked it. People talk about it. And what Lawless has done in this one page is to essentially do the same sort of thing, repeatedly subverting your expectations, and that has the same sort of power. And that's, in my view, good writing. And I think that's a great first page, and that people will enjoy it and the book. So I recommend you give it a try. And we have reached that part of the program where I have to hunt around for the button that stops the recording. And because I'm not going to edit this, you get to see me staring around, trying to find out how to stop it. But I have found out, so I'm going to say goodbye and catch you next time.